the truth, right? Which is,
everyone's got... Now we're recording.
Okay, now I'll be more careful. So, but we should, as we think through our MVP, understand, because it's an open source community and, we're all kind of contributing and how and when and why our interests and our time, that we sort of have to rely on each other, but then also realize that, if one person sort of their contributions end at summertime in New Zealand and maybe James is at the beach, I was able to pick up and we got great feedback from Kristen and others. And, I kind of fixed it up a little bit. I changed the wording, which I think is now much better. I changed the layout of the screen, it's better. Whether we get the colors right and the size of the buttons right, less important. Although...
So for the sake of the recording, John, because you said some really important stuff before, I think it's worth reiterating for anyone who's listening, the sort of the two goals. Could you repeat those very quickly?
Yeah. So 2 goals. So we on May 26th, we've got the Clinton Global Initiative has their annual conference, and Bill Clinton and others will be talking about the projects that they support, one of which is OpenEEW. And so we'll have a great PR moment to promote the project, to talk about the open source and attract attention to us. So we want to have a great, first prepare the PR media story, because, if Bill Clinton says something and a reporter calls and asks, we should have a set of talking bullets for them. And maybe we have a short little trailer video and a nice website and some example dashboard, and maybe an end-to-end storytelling. It doesn't have to be like, no one's going to sit through a 30-minute video of this. They might want to see the 2-minute video of how it all comes together. So we want to use that PR moment to promote the project, to draw more contributors to it, to give us not just momentum going into the Caribbean, but momentum to go to New Zealand, or momentum to go to, the next set of regional networks. And so we want to use that moment to sort of tell our story, tell the OpenEEW story. And then the second big milestone is actually delivering to the Caribbean, Puerto Rico seismology agencies a working solution that we would deploy and actually detect and record events. And for that, it's less on how it looks and more how it works. And so we're going to do the storytelling first. And marketing always makes wonderful promises. And as an engineer, I kind of cringe sometimes. And I think we're all, as engineers, all kind of cringe at like, ooh, we shouldn't have said that, or she shouldn't have said that. But we have to make it real in the second part, and then we decide what's important for the first release and what can fill in the underneath.
I think, John, as a team, I think this is very helpful. At least for me, it is the idea that that the most immediate goal really is this sort of demo or just showcasing what we're doing, but that the fully functional product can follow afterwards. And in fact, we haven't really got a date for that at all. We're sort of, everyone is understanding that we're a bunch of volunteers and we're doing this in a different way to how you would normally deliver a big project.
Right. We should, I think I said earlier, I don't want us to sort of give ourselves a free pass. It's not like we can wait weeks and months. We want to sort of, keep a momentum and a cadence going. So we do deliver to Puerto Rico. And then it just becomes an effort on, when are we sufficiently ready? And we can use the project plan to help us do that, because we might get, 25 feature requests and, have debate on whether they're important or not.
Shall we then quickly go around the different components and see where we are?
Yeah, I think that would be a great idea.
Okay. you want to start, Ryan, maybe on dashboard related work?
Yeah. So the dashboard right now is in, there isn't anything visually that has changed since last time we talked about it with the sensors being up there. Although I believe Johnny is working on currently bringing in the panel that will allow us to change, communicate with the sensor directly. But the big thing that Adrian and I have been working on for about the last week or so is creating a production version of it, a production build that uses Kubernetes in a way that is the real way you're supposed to use it, with storing secrets in Kubernetes and actually having a production build of React instead of the sort of development server that we're running now. I was almost ready to submit a PR for that and move on to the next thing, but then realized that we're actually going to have to, technical detail we don't have to really go down the road of, but the server and the client are actually going to have to be in two different containers to make everything work, because the server is going to run on a configuration that's slightly different than what the React application needs. So we're back to the drawing board just to figure out how to separate those two things. But that shouldn't. I don't expect that to take too long.
Can I play devil's advocate very quickly here? So based on what John had just said a second ago, I mean, if time was sort of coming to a crunch, we could just run it on a server, not in Kubernetes, if we needed to, for the sake of the 26, right?
Yeah, definitely, and it's something that I was thinking about when John was saying that. The problem is right now is that there's so much work done. It's sort of, I painted myself in the corner with the amount of work that I did last week on it, because there's so much work done on converting the application to something that would run in a production environment. But then that last step of separating the containers is what makes all that worthwhile, basically. So if it ends up taking too long, I think I'm going to set a deadline for myself, like either tomorrow or Friday, where if this is not complete, then I might just go on to something else that's going to be more visually impressive on the site for the 25th. But if we could at least, if it's not too much of a hassle, excuse me, then if we complete that, then we have a sort of an official production build of the dashboard, and we don't really have to think about it anymore. As far as the other stuff that we talked about, like connecting Prometheus for some monitoring, there's a handful of sort of back-end things that we discussed doing. I mean, all that stuff I just figure we'll store for after the MVP and just shoot for the 25th. But at least getting the production build up on Kubernetes is something that I'd like to at least do one more kind of mini 1 or 2 day sprint on it. And if it's not done, then I won't worry about it. If it is, then we don't have to worry about it anymore. But beyond that, for the dashboard, it's the stuff that I've talked about before with I want to have a network. I want you to be able to, in the next week or two, be able to change the network and it focus in on the Caribbean if you change it to the Caribbean network or the Mexico network. There are the events page on a hookup. There's just the stuff that's my priority for the 25th is making the dashboard not only function and look professional, but also be sort of visually impressive. And I also want to talk to to everyone here actually about some of the possible visualizations we could include on the sensors page and whatnot, but we can sort of save that for the dashboard specific meeting. But yeah, I think the dashboard for what we have right now works pretty well. There aren't random crashes and whatnot on it. It's just filling out the functionality of it that we planned.
Okay. I'm quite happy to talk about visualizations very, very briefly though. What were you thinking about? Well,
I don't know if this, I don't know if this is helpful or not, or if it's just programmers occasionally come up with things like, wouldn't it be cool to do this? And it has no use outside of it looking cool. But what if we had an overlay on the sensors page that was sort of a sensor density choropleth map, right? Where it in certain areas where there were more sensors, it would show a darker shade of green over that map than places that had lower density of sensors. Would that be helpful at all, or would that be just sort of an addition for the sake of adding something?
I would say if we have so many sensors that we can't really display them as separate points, that would be helpful then. Or if we have hundreds of them in a region like Puerto Rico, that might be good. I think that for those numbers that we might have now, it might not be as much of use. What I would suggest, maybe one of those overlays, like those seismic hazards or seismic risk. Those would be great. I think that, because that will somewhat suggest next locations for sensors. Because if we put the seismic hazard, that's where the highest seismic hazard is. There should be sensors.
Okay. So, do you mean like a shake map? Is that what you mean? Where they have the heat map, the colors?
Yeah, like a heat map of colors. So there is like an institute that produces these seismic hazard maps that are like a bunch of information coming all together about historical seismicity, and like they make this prediction what the likely seismicity is going to be there in the next years. So I think if we could, I would suggest that might be, like, from my perspective, that would be probably the first one to include.
Yeah, definitely. That is the one that I assumed we would include first. This was sort of the sensor density thing was maybe something to add, just to add some options to it, right? But I definitely, if everyone's, I don't know if we've talked about it widely or if it was just Vaslav and I that were talking about it, but the seismic hazard map, despite the fact that it does play on data that doesn't directly come from our network, if everybody's good with including it on the sensors page, or maybe both. I don't know. The sensors and events, or just sensors page?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. Maybe sensors page. It might be more relevant.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, that's at least one visualization. We can turn that on, and people will see colors and hopefully get excited.
Yeah. Well,
about
I don't want to discourage you from sensor density, but I think that unless we have many sensors, it might be spotty and not.
Yeah, it might be now that I think about it, it might be just more of a sort of long-term thing. Like, it's another visualization we could add to it. But if we only have a handful of sensors being turned on, it might actually might actually demonstrate that we don't have the density that we wish we did, or something like that, right off the bat. So yeah, I would say seismic hazard, because there's also a point in the future where we could combine those two things, right? As we could have some sort of visualization that combines how much the seismic hazard matches up with the sensor density. There's all sorts of fun sort of statistics we can create. But yeah, let's start with seismic hazard and hopefully get that in by the 25th.
Yeah, and if it's easy, and if you got it down from the same page, the seismic risk may be also quite interesting, because then it combines the seismic hazard, like the likelihood of a large earthquake being there in the region, and the density and kind of vulnerability of the population centers that are in the region. So that's also quite interesting, or might be quite interesting for people to see, and something that they made. I'm sorry, what was that?
I'm sorry. So the risk was the one that includes the population density, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So the seismic risk what's the name of that institute that does that?
I think it's a GEM.
Global.
It's a global earthquake model, I think.
Right. But that data isn't free, because I know those guys have tried to charge us before for that.
Oh, seriously? Oh, I didn't know. Okay.
Yeah, they're a sort of expensive non-profit.
Oh. Is that for the seismic hazard data also, or is it just for seismic risk, you think?
I would like, in that case, I would guess those are both like similar products of theirs. I would guess it's going to be the same. I didn't know that. I thought that when they are non-profit, they will also provide it for free, but that's probably not how it works.
How much? Is it an affordable amount?
So I met the head of GEM at a conference in Mexico once, and he more or less said we had to pay a lot of money if we wanted to use their data. Maybe it'll be different, because maybe now we're coming more as an open source solution. But I can write to him. Pretty sure it's going to be pay us. So they charge governments to use. That's how they're basically, their model is they charge governments for their data and their software. And then they just the way they operate is a non-profit, so public good, but they do sell products.
So that'd be later. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, that'd be interesting to know, because if we, we might have to think of some replacement if we can't get the data for the seismic hazard with something else.
I'll find out.
But yeah,
sorry, I was a bit later. I might have forgotten about the meeting, and then I was reminded because of the notification I got. Rushed upstairs, and
no worries, Johnny. I break tradition. I usually write that an hour before, but I didn't this time.
Right.
So anything else you want to talk about in terms of the Bachelor? Have you been doing some stuff on the detection, right, and the MQTT? There's been some work being done there.
Yes, there's been a few things since the last time. We were working on it with Adrian, and we created a new repo for the Aws Data Dump, which receives the data, the traces from the MQTT, and dumps them to AWS. So that's one thing. And also we changed the seismology algorithm so it doesn't receive devices through MQTT right now, but it receives devices from Cloudant. So it's just like much more practical this way, and also I guess more reliable, and it gets like all the latitude, longitude from the Cloudant, and updates every 10 seconds or whatever. Like it can be changed. So yeah, those are two main things. We also talked about, I haven't gotten to do that yet, but we talked about writing one more microservice that would take the data, the detections and events from MQTT, and write them to Cloudant. John did that in Node-RED, but I was thinking, as it's like a part of this like bunch of codes, that it would be good to have it written in Python in the same manner as we have the rest of the codes. Yes, John?
Yeah, I was going to, Brian, once we've got a Cloudant database that lists the events, so imagine, a sensor detects an event, whatever shake, you'll be able to display that event on the dashboard, right? You'll be able to look in the database. You'll say, here's the event timestamps, and then be able to point over to AWS to go read the data about that event and actually put it on. So I think in the dashboard, don't we have like something that says last event, and then a visualization of that last event?
Yeah, we have both. We ideally would like the waveform from the last event. So yeah, exactly. If we get the event from Cloudant, we have a time frame for it. We can then go grab it from S3. And I know S3. I haven't been tracking how you've been putting data into S3 or what the plan is for that. But at some point, we talked about possibly using Athena. So Athena is like Amazon's way of querying S3 data. I think it uses SQL. I don't know. I can't remember from my certification exam or whatever. That was one of the questions. But I think it uses some sort of, I think it's some version of SQL or whatnot. But we might be able to tap into that, or we can just get the files themselves. I guess all I'm saying is, if there's a lot of work going into figuring out how to query those files, we potentially could add another service on top of it that might make it a little easier.
And as far as I remember, I think I mentioned to you, Ryan, our sort of open data account with AWS, they offered the use of Athena. Like we can't, for example, create EC2s, but you can use Athena.
You can use Athena, yeah.
Yeah, Vaclav had proposed a file naming convention. Seemed easy enough.
Yeah, I mean, if you could just grab JSON files, I mean, that's simple too. If the files are named something specific enough, the queries should be fast enough,
So if it was through SQL, how, like, you would have to have some other database that would be linked to those files in S3? Is that how it would work?
I'm not exactly sure of exactly how it's implemented, but I don't know if it can dig. I don't know if it like digs into the files or whatnot. I'd have to do a little bit of research into how Athena works. But think that you can use it, like if you just have a bunch of CSV or JSON or something in S3, you can kind of give it what the schema of those files are and then make queries on it. But I'd have to confirm, because I might be confusing that with other services.
Yeah, the thing is that right now there is, because those are two different services, the Seismology and the AWS Data Dump, it does not have the trace, does not have an ID of the event. So if you, like, we'll have to come up with a way, like how you read events from the cloud and create, like, and kind of get the right file from there, because the file doesn't know what event it belongs to.
And that shouldn't be a problem, because the things that I would think I would need to know are from the cloud and database, the times, so what times the event happened or what the time frame is for it, and then the sensor IDs. So if I could get those two pieces of information, then I could just grab that out of AWS.
Yeah. It should be fine.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and I think otherwise there wasn't as much on the Seismology repo. There's a few, I guess there's a few other things. Like we talked about the convention for naming the topics for MQTT. So that's probably something that we wanted to bring up, although I'm not really sure if like now we need to talk about it in detail. So there are 3 categories. There was a type. Where is that? So we had
events and detections.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, go ahead if you found the list.
Yeah, type, ID, and event. And those are like 3 key value pairs that we'll use for naming the topics for MQTT. And we were thinking that 2 of those, like one of them needs to say whether it's an event, detection, or trace. So that's an obvious one. Another one probably should say what region that information is coming from, because even if we have only one endpoint, only one Kubernetes or something where this code is running, we'll probably have multiple instances of that running in different regions. I think that's probably how it's going to be done, or we will have different endpoints at some point in the future. So there should be like an identifier of the network or the region where that information is coming from. So somebody can subscribe just to one region of information. And then the third one, we did not really know what to put in there. Like we are thinking about it may be beneficial for the future, although we have only one type of the sensor right now, or like only one type of data transmission, like Wi-Fi and Ethernet. As we have, maybe we will have cellular in future, so those might work on slightly different. Those might work in slightly different modes. So I think that we may end up with just sending some very pre-processed information, maybe not even data, as we are doing right now. We are sending on-trigger data, but we are still sending raw data. But if the internet connection is very weak, we might just send a very pre-processed data, just the detection and a few bits and pieces of information about the traces. So in that case, we might need some identifier saying that, okay, this is not a device with Wi-Fi, this is a device with cellular or something like that. But I don't think it's necessary.
Let's wait and see, right? Because potentially we can treat them the same way. Like a cellular connection could quite easily transmit 5 minutes of data, occasionally, without it being expensive or complicated.
Yeah, for sure. Like this was just an idea. I'm just like, we are talking about this on Monday and thinking like what can be the third identifier that may be of use. And I'm not really. This is just an idea that it may be useful, but I'm not really keen on that. Like, and I think that those are like there are two important identifiers, and that's the detection, trace, or event, and the region. Those are, in my eyes, those are the 2 important ones. But then the third one, I don't really know. Like, we can just leave it empty for now, or just put a placeholder and change it in future.
Yeah,
we need
placeholder.
Yeah.
Well, isn't the topic name the thing we wanted to go target the use cases for to make it up? So I guess to say that in a better way, Ryan, you're going to be one of the consumers of this topic or the topics that are on MQTT. So, you have to give some input on kind of what type of data do you want to pull from MQTT, because then that'll make it easier to form essentially the API, but it's a topic string for you. And then there's also, if we want to do alerting, we have to either make a new topic for alerting or make the topic that you use on the UI work for alerting as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. So the data that I'm going to subscribe to for MQTT for the sensors at least should be. So I've got an example of it somewhere because it's already, the component we have for React that reads the waveform already, and we can change it, but it already reads off of the JSON that was made available, I think, from the sensor data that used to be in. Oh boy, I can't remember where I even got that, but I think it was in AWS somewhere. But I can post it up there. So if you need kind of a format for what the JSON needs to look like.
Well, it's not just the JSON, but yeah, you're getting down the right path. I'm looking at it similar to, like, you were a front-end developer and I was a back-end developer, and John, I saw you have a hole in your mouth earlier. If you were a front-end developer and I was a back-end, we would have to design an API contract, right, between the two of us to communicate. So it's like I would make my endpoints work in a way that's useful to you because you're the primary consumer.
Yeah. So I don't know, like, how does that work?
So,
I mean, I don't even know how, like, you would, like, make that connection or what it looks like when you initially connect.
Let's see if I can maybe tell a story that might be helpful. So in the use case of the dashboard, someone might want to subscribe to their sensors. Someone might want to subscribe to their regional network. And so we'll have an event or a detection, and we'll have the Caribbean network, and then we'll have, a particular sensor, for instance. So I can say, only show me waveforms for my sensor, or only show me all waveforms for the Caribbean network. So anytime there's a shake anywhere in the Caribbean, I want to be able to see a waveform. And so you can do a sort of a wildcard. In the MQTT topic, you can put a plus, and that basically says, show me everything in Caribbean, and then plus on everything else. So you can actually use wildcards to sort of describe how big of a filter you want or not.
Okay, so you basically need from me kind of the user stories for what those MQTT connections are going to be, basically. Is that what it would be most useful?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I can put that in Slack, because I have to remind myself also what Kristen has in the designs too, because I don't know, can you look at the waveform of other people's sensors live, right? I think it's only your own, right? But I don't know, why would that be protected?
I'm not sure.
Unless you're running nuclear tests in your backyard or something. It's sort of something that
So I do want to see that. Well, that's a good privacy question we should ask ourselves. If I'm publishing my data to the Caribbean network and my device goes off, right? There's a detection. Don't we want to tell other people about that? Show other people about that detection?
Yeah.
I would think,
yeah. There's certain stuff that's private that needs to be private or should be private, I think, or people would want it as a default to be private. There's other stuff where, by signing up for this, you should have to give that data over, right? I mean, if you're part of the system. Detections.
To be honest, we're writing it to AWS, which is open.
Right.
Exactly. Exactly. Like.
So you probably could see I would say you should be able to see the waveforms of anybody's sensor, just by clicking on it. I mean, I don't think.
Yeah.
What are you gonna do with that piece of data? That's
Yeah,
Yeah.
in my opinion, a waveform is not exactly something that you should be scared about when you were talking about privacy.
yeah.
It's just a waveform. It's not like they'll know what TV shows you watch with or whatever.
Yeah.
With a waveform,
Yeah, exactly.
Oh. In a Cold War era, seismic data are very sensitive.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
But
right.
we are not in the Cold War era, so.
No, like, oh
Yeah,
my,
yeah.
that someone's moving tanks down the street, right? We're not
Yeah.
trying to track
But
tanks in the street. anymore.
So from what
man,
you said,
imagine.
John, do we need a disclaimer then? I mean, when you sign up for this, you need to know that you are contributing to a global project. So people should be well aware of this,
I was just about to say that.
right?
And people also should be aware about even the location. Even though the location is truncated in the dashboard, it still is a location, right? I mean, people know that I live in Glendale, California by looking at if I were to have a sensor on there. I mean, I think there needs to be some sort of contract or some sort of legal terms that says, we try and respect your privacy, but at the same time, there are just belonging to this network means that there's going to be a certain amount of things that you have to make public.
Yeah.
Privacy policy / terms of service.
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean-
right. Because it's only going to be helpful to the seismology algorithm if we know where your sensor is. If you don't tell us where the sensor is, then don't sign up.
That's
Yeah.
a good point, because what users will see, like location-wise, is not what we will see as a platform, right?
Well, users.
We have to make
Yeah.
sure
Oh, sorry.
we have to just make sure that the user who signs up knows that we as a platform, well, not we as a person, but we as, like, the code knows the people's exact location, but the people don't. So there should be a differentiated, like there's public data and there's private data, and the private data is more specific, as far as I'm aware. I might be wrong, so correct me if I am.
Yeah.
So we have to make sure that people are aware of both of these.
Right.
Yeah.
So, question for Kristen then. I mean, is this about wording?
Or, do we have a lawyer on the
Yeah, we
on the
should.
project? That's,
Brandy, maybe that's a good question for Brandy. Is there someone on the IBM? No, the trouble is IBM doesn't want to give legal advice. So I know the answer. Already.
Is there a quick and dirty way to do this? Like the site which Neil showed us the other day. I mean, there's a few examples of this, right? Of weather sites and whatever else. If we just sort of more or less look at the steps that are taken when you subscribe to these things and copy them and assume they have good lawyers.
I mean, the.
Uh,
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Gareth.
Yeah, I mean, my advice when I have clients with questions like this is like, I can't, this is all kind of lawyer territory, but I don't think it ever, and I don't even know lawyers from where, right? I mean, we're dealing with multiple countries here. It's a global system, but I mean, you can never go wrong with just being upfront very clearly what we're doing with your data, right? So if you have a very clear sort of consent page that is like not 5,000 words of fine print, but just here's a list of things that you're agreeing to. I don't think that's always a good place to start. I don't know if it covers all the legal check marks, but
probably not.
Yeah.
And
we do have. I'm sorry. I was speaking on mute earlier, but I was saying that we do have a legal person that we do work with. So if I know the specific ask, I can follow up on that for you.
Yeah, that might be helpful because I have a lot of questions like jurisdiction, right? Do we write U.S. rules or Puerto Rico rules or Mexico rules or, pick a country? But then there's GDPR types of privacy questions. And then we want, to Ryan's point, I think we should, the more upfront we are, here's how we're going to use your data. Here's what we're going to show on the dashboard. And here's, our responsibilities to you. And, here's when you buy a sensor, this is sort of what you're agreeing to. If we can sort of write that down without the legalese, and we agree on, and then we give it to a lawyer, then they can.
There's another question for you, John, which which stumps me here. Like if this was my startup Grillo, or if this was IBM's project, or if this was any one of us and our organizations or persons, then the liability falls on the entity by which is creating this project. But this project does not have a legal entity behind it. You know, I mean, in a way, the Linux Foundation is looking out for the project. But like, you know, who would get sued here? You know, like there's none of us are liable for this because there's no entity here. If you know what I mean.
I think
Yeah,
you would actually.
Yeah, actually, I think the person who actually originally created.
Well, it has a Apache license on it, right? Which means
the
that
data's living on my server, so that might be an issue.
Yeah, but you're also selling the devices that kick off this whole thing. Like that's a key part. That's your service, and then you're giving the software part file for free.
And,
right.
But by the way, GDPR also applies to nonprofits. So if we consider this nonprofit, we still have to be compliant with it.
Yeah. The Linux Foundation does have some really good lawyers. So if we wanted,
speaking for Linux, exactly, that's exactly right. Let me ask Todd, who's a lawyer at the Linux Foundation. Let me ask him this question.
Yeah,
I'm going to write an
Michael
email
Dolan and Todd.
That's exactly the right thing to do. Yeah.
Yeah, because my understanding of the Apache license that is applied is that you basically, by using any of these products, and I don't know, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't say like specifically what products it pertains to. It pertains to the dashboard, but not this other thing, but it basically says that if you use this, you don't, you know, you're not going to sue any of the creators of it just because you're accepting the risk by using it. But that was my assumption. I don't know. I don't know if that's right or not.
Well, if that's the case, we'll have to have that little line of legal in every one of the licenses, because all of these projects, like the dashboard, the app, the backend, whatever, all come together as one product. And if one of those licenses doesn't have that line in it, I think we can still be liable. Because then I'm not like, as Ryan said, as everyone else here said, I'm not a lawyer, but I think we need to just, you know, make sure there's no holes, even we as non-lawyers can see.
You're right. I think John's suggestion is the right one for me, which is get the Linux Foundation involved. They're the ones who actually hold the project licenses and everything. So let's get them involved.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, because we're not going to solve it here. All right, we have 15 minutes. Let's see if we want to do. Adrian, do you want to talk about? And because I want to get to Adrian, Johnny, and myself, and maybe Gareth, if you got anything up.
All right. So I guess for me, I'm still working on infrastructure stuff. I want to make a comment about something that happened. Like, I mean, it was mentioned like 30 minutes ago now, but on the Kubernetes talk about the dashboard, regardless of Ryan's outcome with getting the production build, we're still using Kubernetes. The only difference is whether or not, like when we say production build, we're talking about literally the React being compressed into a production build, and that's like the only impact. But either way, it'll still get deployed to Kubernetes. So that's one thing.
Do I understand it right, that Adrian, that you would have a pod for React and a pod for the backend?
It depends on the breakdown, but yeah, that's what it looks like. It's essentially there's at least one pod for every Docker image that's created. So if you put a image with the backend, image with the front end, then we'll have one pod for each at least.
Okay, because right now they're in the same pod.
Yeah, they're in the
same
pod.
container.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's one piece, and then some other pieces. All right. So I'm doing. I mentioned to you guys that we're going to do the staging site, right? The staging.openeew.com. So that's working with the dashboard. So when someone merges code into the master branch, it goes to staging. And then if somebody cuts a release, which we just cut a first release on Friday, we're officially version 0.70, I believe. And then so when you cut a release, another build kicks off and then it goes into the official website. But I did the same thing with seismology, right? So the idea there is that all of the repos that have GitHub Actions can deploy to a staging environment first, and then the staging environments could all interact with each other. And then if they hit releases, they get deployed into the production environment. Does that make sense? So everyone should have that layer if you have GitHub Actions. So I'm going to do the same thing with the AWS Data Dump that Vaclav is making, and then the Right to Cloud service that Vaclav is making as well. And as a prototype for those two services, we're trying to see if they could work with Code Engine, which is a new IBM product. Primarily, I'm doing it because I'm interested in seeing whether or not it would work. Worst case scenario is we could just deploy it to Kubernetes because it involves you creating a Docker container and then putting it into Code Engine. But that same Docker container could be deployed to Kubernetes pretty easily. So that's what I'm going to be working on. And as far as the MVP, I think that falls into my MVP, but I think that we could fit the Prometheus stuff in before May 25th as non-MVP. It's like a stretch goal. And then the reason why I'm saying that is because it's not complex to do because we're only going to put it on the dashboard's backend right now. So that's a couple lines changes there for me and Ryan, and then it involves me deploying Prometheus or using LogDNA from IBM Cloud, whichever path we choose to take. But that's not going to take a month of work. I would say it's less than a week, so we can still fit it in. There's no real rush for it, but I figured the automation and infrastructure pieces I'm doing won't take me 6 weeks to do, so I have bandwidth to add this kind of stuff. And that's it for me.
I would love to do some download OpenEEW.com testing, and then because in the past it was just me compile and flash the board, and maybe Gareth would clone the repo and compile and flash his board. But now we've got Neil, and we have the sensors down in Puerto Rico. So and Neil sounds like he's not here, but he was able to compile it himself. But I actually pushed for him yesterday a version of the firmware to his device remotely. Glad that it worked, but I using the old infrastructure, not the new download. And so I like your idea of just a GitHub action that just builds the container. I think I have even the YAML file and the Docker file for that. So maybe I could that way I can push an alpha version every day if I wanted to.
Well, yeah. I mean, we talked a little bit about the added GitHub actions there. That's why I asked you about the other day if this was going to be MVP, because if it is, and you did answers and you said yes, then that means that I can do this. Setting up the. I mean, what I want to do is have GitHub actions on all of the repos that we think people will contribute to, and that automation would help, and that's almost everything, right? So there's. I'll add the GitHub actions to the downloads repo as on my to-do. You definitely made it easier because you already created the Docker file and then the YAML file. So I just need to make the actions.
Okay, very cool. All right, let's maybe find some time to do that. All right, we have 10 minutes. Johnny, do you want to talk about I think you were going to work on a dashboard sidebar?
Yeah, I have been, like usual, and I know it's been the same every time, but I will set aside some time tomorrow. The first thing I do is continue working on that. It's just that I've been so extremely busy. Like, it's insane. I thought this time off from school would mean like more time off, but nope. Nope. And then I have some French assignment as well, but that'll have to wait because I'm not working for school in vacation, so she can
prioritize fun over work.
Yeah. So I have work to do. I know tomorrow I should have the entire day free, and I don't think it's that much work, so it should be doable in that time period. And if not, I'll take the day after as well. But Neil's posted a message about him not being here and a small update in the Slack channel if you wanted to see that.
Yeah, I see that on. I'll actually introduce that. So those of you that know, I think Neil joined last week. So sort of a maker type of guy. I think he's probably going to listen to this. So he's been very helpful in terms of, I think we sent him a sensor, Andy sent him a sensor. So he's, been able to connect to it. And he's tested a code path that I didn't really spend a lot of time on. I had built some code on the original prototype board, which wasn't quite even wired correctly. We would, Andy remembers, the Ethernet cable, we would get the disconnect events, but it wasn't actually wired correctly to actually send data. So I put all this code in place, but then never really tested the state diagram where you start with it plugged in or not plugged in, or you hot plug or hot unplug, or you provision and not provision So there's a lot of state diagram to that. And he was seeing some crashes in the code, and scratched my head over the weekend. And I saw one place where I was malloking and freeing the same piece of memory over and over again. And I thought that's what caused the heap problem. Maybe not. It definitely, I pushed some code updates the other day that I certainly is going to make it better. Whether it solves the problem, I'm not so sure. But I moved all of the free unfreeze out of the main loop, and it's sort of in a much smaller place now, which I think is going to be more reliable. That's good. And then I was trying to understand, and I have to draw the state diagram where there's lots of different ways, because we didn't necessarily, we all, in the provisioning app, we were mostly focused on getting the Wi-Fi to work. But there are scenarios where people plug it in with an Ethernet cable, so they actually will, plug it in. And I don't think they're going to do a lot of hot plugs back and forth, but we certainly should try. And the tricky part there is you have to tear down the MQTT connection and reconnect, and tear down the MQTT connection, and sort of do a whole reinitialization. And so maybe there's a bug in that section of code.
Sorry, John. I always thought that the ESP32 treated Ethernet as if it was Wi-Fi. I mean, it uses the same libraries. Why I don't understand why it's be different.
Yeah, I thought so too. And actually, I put some debug in, and it's much more, just as two debug statements, and now it's much more stable. Don't ask me why. I didn't make any other change. I'm going to send that version to Neil to see if that sort of quote solves it for him, which makes me a little suspect. But I definitely had it in my code where I saw the event, the hot plug event, and I tear down the MQTT connection and reconnect. So I thought it through. It just not sure if I ever tested that code path.
It's great because I've been encouraging everyone to use Ethernet. I definitely think it's preferable for our use case. I know we've had devices in Mexico in the field, and after 1.5 years, someone changed the Wi-Fi, and then you've lost that sensor. So this is good.
Yeah, that's a good point. Anyway, so it's a good. Neil's been very helpful as a tester, so very appreciative of that. And the other thing I worked on last week, I think on Friday, as part of our dashboard call, we reviewed some of the redline feedback that Kristen had proposed for the provisioning app. And we had been waiting for James. James hasn't sort of been at the beach, I guess. So I made some changes to the wording. I think the wording that was proposed definitely made it better. And then I changed some colors and the fonts, and I moved it around, and I was able to figure out more Flutter. I feel like I'm finally understand how Flutter layout works. So that's positive. I think I got stuck on with the color of the font and the size of the buttons. So I put some screenshots up. But I think so. Feel good about making good UX experience improvements there. My main worry about the mobile app is we still don't have it working on iOS. And Gareth had tried, I had tried, and Pedro tried, and we all are failing in the same spot. And I put my laptop in sort of Wi-Fi monitor mode. I don't even know if you can do that on Windows or Mac, but there's a set of commands on Linux that you can turn your Wi-Fi into a monitor and listen to all the packets on the network. And so I did that with Wireshark at TCP dump, and I was listening to all the packets looking for smart config, and I didn't quite find the needle in the haystack on iOS. We need probably some people that are more expert in iOS.
Can I suggest, John, that if we're talking about May 26 today, that maybe the iOS isn't. I mean, we can demand of the people installing the sensors in Puerto Rico that they use an Android device. I don't think that's out of the question. and we can follow up later with the iOS. That we don't let that hold us back.
Okay. Yeah. Those are my two
Most
updates.
people outside the States and outside Europe have Android, in my experience.
Yeah. Yeah. So we do have to probably, once Kristen blesses or helps me with whatever last size of fonts and so forth, then we should post a new version to the Play Store.
Okay.
Okay.
Just from my side, we've got 17 new locations. The seismic network in Puerto Rico sent us 15 locations in really interesting areas. I'm going to put it on a map and share it in Slack. It's complicated because they gave us latitude, longitude, and I've been using the Google Geo thing to do my map, so I've got to do it in reverse now. But anyway, I've looked at a lot of them, and they're in really fantastic places. And then we have 2 offices from HP. The problem with HP is that they're really fussy about security. So I've got to call on Friday with one of them IT guys to see if we can. I'm going to ask to have a guest network or something we can use. But anyway, that's what's happening.
Yeah, I was wondering about that because, like in IBM, you don't give a password when you join the Wi-Fi. You join the Wi-Fi with a certificate. So have we got that covered?
No, it's just an yes. We're just using basic, as a basic WPA to user and password. We're not using TLS, EAP TLS, or TLS EAP.
Because our provisioning app might need to be able to supply a certificate to a device, and God knows where it would get that certificate from. The HP certificate, for example, for joining their Wi-Fi.
It's a really good point, Gareth, because I'm now imagining all the Walmarts and all of these other places in Puerto Rico who will probably have corporate networks that we have to deal with.
But it's okay.
Yeah, why don't we just
wire,
ask?
It's just the Wi-Fi.
Okay. So if you were me, Gareth, on Friday talking to the HP guys, and you were trying to put them at ease, is there anything I could say about that we can't snoop their data or anything?
So the only thing that the sensor collects and transmits is motion accelerometer, right? XYZ. And so we're not even if we're physically on their network, the only thing that traverses across that network is shake data.
Yeah, but they're going to be worried about somebody taking over the sensor and putting their own code on it to do whatever they want.
Mm-hmm.
So maliciously, you could do something with this.
How do you stop that?
So even if we do have certificates and so forth, and I've got a pretty solid over-the-air plan. But again, the only thing that on the sensor is a buzzer, a light, and an accelerometer. So I don't know what type of data you would get. Even if you were to take over this thing, you could add it to a bot, sort of like on a bot network. So you could do, denial of service if you wanted to attack something else. That would be bad.
Yeah, we want to not allow anybody to put a bot on your device. Only you should be able to program your device.
Right. Yeah, so we've got a pretty good over-the-air security model.
If anything comes out of this call, I'll let you guys know in the chat. But I'm hoping just to prove that we're good guys somehow.
Yeah.
I just thought I'd mention.
We should ask about putting it in an IBM location too.
Well, that shouldn't be too hard of you guys. I thought I'd mention, I know it's completely not part of what we're doing for version 1, but I'm very proud of myself for being able to flash devices at record speed now using my new gimmick. The reason I created this Raspberry Pi thing at the back here is because the guys in China doing 200 devices were having issue. I asked them to flash the firmware and they're having issue with that. So I figured I'm just going to ship them a Raspberry Pi, which is all ready to go, and they just press this button every time. Given that we in our boards we didn't feature one pin we needed, a 3.3 volts, so that we could use an FTDI thing. Anyway, I'm very proud of it because basically what I have a shell script which more or less is triggered when you plug a USB thing in, and runs all of this firmware stuff, and then these LEDs which tell you what stage you are in the flashing process.
That's pretty cool. So let me ask. I saw your picture, but then I didn't want to ask too many questions. So essentially, the team would they've got the Raspberry Pi, they just plug in their sensor and they press a button.
Yeah, so basically, it's actually, I'm 3D printing an enclosure. It's going to be pretty neat when it's all done. But basically, and there's a little LED which is on the top of my Raspberry Pi, which is also going to print out some stuff as well along the way. And this is going to be a nice big arcade button, but it's got a little one now. So basically, actually you don't even need the buttons. I have it so it can be triggered when it runs when you plug in a USB device. It listens to that, and then it just runs the flashware. It does a little beep. And then these LEDs using a GPI library sort of tell you which part of the firmware stage it's at. And then it just goes green when it's ready for you to do the next one.
Cool.
So all you need is the Raspberry Pi, which will come pre-ready with the binaries that you've created. So it's ready to go.
And what happens if we have new firmware? How do we get new firmware on the Raspberry Pi? Or we don't?
We don't.
We just... Okay.
At some point, we have to trust the endpoints we've created for OTA.
Yeah. And then we ship it from China to wherever they need to go, and then the first time they turn on, they'll get the update. Okay.
Exactly. Or anybody else who wants to do their own boards. This is an easier. Well, using the firmware is the easiest way.
Yeah. Cool. That's good.
Okay. Anything else?
No, not for me.
No. All right. So we do have a call on Friday, and I would love for us to also review the project plan, because we do have a couple of sprints and some tickets open there.
I've started working on the website content using the structure that Daniel put in the issue. So hopefully this week I'll do a PR.
Cool. Yeah, I think Kristen is out for the week, and I think through the weekend. So yeah, on Friday I'll host a call. But if anyone wants to talk about anything specific, we can get on the agenda via Slack.
Yeah, sorry again for my lack of work recently. Just again, super busy, and you'd only have so much time in a day, sadly.
No worries. Well, it's good that you can make these calls, Johnny. So at least you stay up to date, and then when you're ready, you won't be behind on what's going on.
Yeah. So yeah, tomorrow I should have all day free, and that should all be good to go. And then I can make the little side panel, and then I should be able to PR that. If it's not tomorrow, but you finish by tomorrow, it'll be by the day after, right? So.
Wonderful.
Sounds good.
Okay, everybody. Well, have a good rest of your day.
Yep. Have a good day, everyone.
You too.
I'm gonna go
Bye. See ya.
straight to bed.
Bye-bye.
Yep. Bye, Bernie.
Okay. Take care.